I never thought the sound of rain against my window would sound like Judgment Day, but that night, the sky was weeping with a violence that felt personal. It was a Tuesday, of all days. An ordinary, forgettable Tuesday in November, the kind of evening where you wrap yourself in a knit blanket, hold a cup of tea that's grown slightly too cold, and tell yourself that life is peaceful. I had spent 10 years building this peace. I had constructed it brick by brick, mortar by mortar, using silence and distance as my primary tools. I had convinced myself that my heart was a fortress, impenetrable and healed, a sanctuary where the ghosts of the past could no longer haunt me. I was proud of my solitude. I was proud of the quiet life I had stitched together after everything fell apart. I told everyone at church that I had moved on, that I had washed my hands of the toxicity, that I was walking in the light, and I believed it. I truly believed that the anger had evaporated, replaced by a holy indifference. But the universe, or perhaps God, has a way of testing the foundations of the houses we build to see if they are made of stone or just hardened sand. The knock on the door didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like a hesitation. It was faint, almost swallowed by the howling wind outside and the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof. I froze. No one came to my house this late. My children were grown and living 3 states away. My neighbors were elderly and retired by 8. A sudden cold shiver danced down my spine, and primal instinct warning me that the safety of my living room was about to be violated. I set my tea down on the coaster, the ceramic clicking loudly in the silence. I walked to the door, my socks sliding on the hardwood floor, feeling a strange heaviness in my chest, a tightening that I couldn't explain. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling slightly. Why was I trembling? And pulled the heavy oak door open. The wind rushed in first, cold and wet, carrying the scent of dead leaves and ozone. And then, I saw her. Time didn't just stop. It shattered. It splintered into a million jagged pieces, each one reflecting a memory I had buried in the deepest, darkest grave of my subconscious. Standing on my porch, soaked to the bone, her expensive coat ruined by the deluge, her hair plastered to a face that I had once loved like a sister and then hated like a demon, was Julia, the woman who had held my hand while I cried over infertility, and then the woman who had secretly slept with my husband while I was at those doctor's appointments, the woman who had been the architect of my destruction, the architect of the divorce that left me bankrupt, broken, and questioning my own worth as a human being. 10 years. It had been 10 years since I last looked into those green eyes. Back then, they were triumphant, mocking, full of the arrogant shine of someone who thinks they have won the prize. Now they were hollow. They were 2 dark tunnels of absolute despair, rimmed with red, swollen from crying, looking at me not with pride, but with the terrified desperation of a drowning animal. I should have slammed the door. Every fiber of my being, every instinct of self-preservation, screamed at me to slam that heavy oak wood in her face. I wanted to lock the deadbolt, turn off the porch light, and retreat back into my safe, warm lie of a peaceful life. My stomach churned with a nausea so violent I thought I might be sick right there on the welcome mat. The bile of betrayal rose in my throat, acidic and burning. Memories flashed before my eyes like a strobe light in a nightmare, the text messages I found on his phone, the way she looked at me at the Christmas party knowing what she was doing, the smirk she gave me in the courtroom when the assets were divided, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of what she had done. She hadn't just hurt me. She had decimated my reality. She had taken the one person I trusted most and turned him into a weapon against me. And now, here she was, standing on my porch like a wet stray dog, daring to bring her tragedy to the doorstep of the woman she had destroyed. "Sarah," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, broken, a jagged shard of sound that barely rose above the rain. She was shivering violently, her teeth chattering, her hands clutching her arms as if she were trying to hold her own shattering body together. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." The audacity of it took my breath away. Nowhere else to go? She had the life she stole. She had the house, the money, the circle of friends that she had turned against me with her whispered lies. How could she stand there and tell me she had nowhere to go? Anger, hot and white, flared in my chest. It was a righteous fire, a biblical fury. I opened my mouth to scream at her, to unleash a decade of suppressed rage, to tell her to go back to the hell she had created and leave me in my hard-earned purgatory. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted to see her crumble. I wanted to taste the sweetness of rejection, to give her a fraction of the pain she had spoon-fed me for years. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw something that stopped the words in my throat. I didn't see the victor. I didn't see the mistress. I saw a ruin. Her face was gaunt, her eyes haunted by something far worse than guilt. Fear. Deep, primal fear. It was in that split second of hesitation that the Holy Spirit whispered. It wasn't a thunderous voice from the heavens. It was a quiet, annoying, persistent nudge in the center of my chest. It was a friction against my flesh. Open the door. No, absolutely not. I refused. I argued with God in the span of a heartbeat. Lord, you saw what she did. You saw the nights I spent on the bathroom floor praying for death because the pain was too much. You cannot ask this of me. Ask me to donate money. Ask me to go on a mission trip. Ask me to fast for 40 days, but do not ask me to let the devil into my living room. But the nudge didn't leave. It grew heavier. It was the weight of the cross. The inconvenient, heavy, splintered weight of a grace I didn't want to extend. Julia took a step forward, then stumbled, her knees buckling as if the strings holding her up had been cut. She caught herself on the doorframe, her wet hand leaving a smear on the wood. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the bruise. A dark, ugly purple shadow blossoming along her jawline, poorly hidden by makeup that the rain had washed away. My heart stopped. The narrative in my head, the story of the wicked witch who lived happily ever after with my stolen prince, suddenly developed a crack. The reality of her presence collided with the fantasy of my resentment. She wasn't here to mock me. She wasn't here to gloat. She was bleeding, metaphorically and perhaps literally. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, filled only by the relentless rain. I stood at the precipice of a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could close the door and remain the victim, righteous and justified in my bitterness, safe in my tower. Or I could open the door and step into a mess that I knew, with a terrifying certainty, was going to hurt. I looked at her shivering form, the water dripping from her nose, the sheer pathetic nature of her existence in this moment, and with a sigh that felt like I was exhaling my very soul, I stepped back. I didn't say a word. I couldn't trust my voice. I just stepped back, creating a space in the doorway, a gap wide enough for a sinner to enter. Julia looked at the space I had made, her eyes widening in disbelief. She hesitated, as if waiting for the trap to spring, waiting for me to laugh and slam the door shut. But when I didn't move, when I just stood there with my hand gripping the doorknob so hard my knuckles turned white, she crossed the threshold. She stepped out of the storm and into my sanctuary, bringing the smell of rain and fear with her. As she walked past me, I smelled it, the scent of her expensive perfume, now mixed with the metallic tang of despair. I closed the door against the wind, locking the deadbolt with a definitive click. I turned to face her. She was standing in the middle of my foyer, dripping water onto my rug, looking small and lost. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that the peace I thought I had was a lie. The real storm wasn't outside. The real storm was just beginning, right here in my living room. And I had no idea if my faith was strong enough to weather it. The silence that followed the closing of the door was heavier than the storm raging outside. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of tension that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the hallway. Julia stood there, dripping onto my hardwood floors, a puddle of dark rainwater forming around her expensive leather boots like a widening pool of oil. Every drop that fell sounded like a clock ticking down to an explosion. I stared at the water damaging the finish of the floorboards I had painstakingly restored myself last summer, and a petty, bitter part of my brain screamed, "She's still doing it. Even now she's ruining things I built." It was an uncharitable thought, a jagged shard of the old resentment surfacing instantly, but I couldn't help it. The body remembers trauma even when the mind claims to have healed, and her presence was a trigger that bypassed all my spiritual discipline. I was vibrating with a chaotic mix of adrenaline, fear, and a dark, ugly curiosity. "I'll get a towel," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It was too calm, too flat. It was the voice of a stranger. I turned my back on her, a risk that felt physical, exposing my spine to the woman who had stabbed me there figuratively a decade ago. Walking down the hallway to the linen closet, my legs felt like lead. Every step was a battle against the urge to run back, grab her by the arm, and throw her back into the night. "Why did you open the door?" The question looped in my mind. "Why, Sarah? You were free." But as I reached into the closet and pulled out a thick, fluffy beige towel, one of the good ones, I noted with a grimace, I knew why. Because despite the scars, despite the therapy, despite the nights I screamed into my pillow until my throat bled, I was still a follower of the man who washed the feet of the one who would betray him. And that theological reality was currently irritating me more than I cared to admit. I didn't want to be like Jesus right now. I wanted to be vindicated. When I returned to the foyer, Julia hadn't moved an inch. She was trembling so violently that I could hear the chattering of her teeth from 5 feet away. She looked like a sculpture of misery, her wet hair curtaining her face, her posture slumped in defeat. I held out the towel, maintaining the distance of a contagiously sick patient. She reached for it with numb, red fingers, her eyes finally meeting mine again. The gratitude in them was raw and terrifying. She didn't just take the towel, she clutched it like a lifeline, burying her face in the dry fabric and letting out a sob that sounded like something ripping. I watched her dry her face, watched the makeup smear onto the beige cotton, and I felt nothing but a cold, detached numbness. I was observing a car crash in slow motion. "Come into the kitchen," I commanded. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. I couldn't stand having her in my entryway, the gateway to my sanctuary. The kitchen felt more utilitarian, a place of neutral ground. I walked ahead, not waiting to see if she followed, listening for the squelch of her wet boots behind me. In the kitchen, the bright fluorescent lights left no shadows to hide in. I pointed to a wooden chair at the small round table in the corner. "Sit." She obeyed instantly, sinking into the chair with a groan of exhaustion that rattled her chest. I moved to the stove, filling the kettle with water. My hands were shaking so badly I splashed water onto the burner, the hiss of it evaporating sounding like a snake. I needed to keep my back to her. I needed a minute to compose the mask of composure I was wearing, because underneath it, I was hyperventilating. "I didn't know where else to go," Julia whispered again to my back. Her voice was gaining a little strength, but it was still laced with that frantic edge. "I drove around for hours. I drove until the car ran out of gas a few blocks away. I walked here. I gripped the counter, my knuckles turning white. She ran out of gas. She walked in the storm. This wasn't a casual visit. This was a catastrophe. I turned around slowly, leaning against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest as a shield. "Where is David?" I asked. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in years. I referred to him as my ex, or him, but never David. David was the man who loved me. The man who left didn't deserve a name. But in this moment, the name was the only key that fit the lock. Julia flinched. The reaction was visceral. She hunched her shoulders as if I had raised a hand to strike her. She looked down at her hands, which were twisting the towel into tight, painful knots. He's at the house," she stammered. "Or he's looking for me. I don't know." I turned off my phone. "Is he the one who did that?" I gestured with my chin toward the bruise on her jaw. The harsh kitchen light made it look even worse, a bloom of violet and sickly yellow spreading across her skin. Julia touched the spot tentatively, wincing. Tears welled up in her eyes again, spilling over and running down her cheeks, mixing with the rain that still dampened her collar. She nodded, a jerky, broken movement. He got angry. He's been getting angry a lot lately, ever since the business started failing. It was an accident, Sarah. He didn't mean to strike me. He threw the glass and... "Don't!" I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Do not sit in my kitchen and lie to me about the nature of accidental violence. I might have been blind 10 years ago, Julia, but I have 20/20 vision now. The air crackled between us. The accusation hung there, not just about the abuse, but about the blindness of the past. My mind flashed back to the days before the divorce, the dinner parties where Julia and David would laugh a little too hard at each other's jokes, the way their eyes would meet across the room when they thought I wasn't looking, the way Julia would tell me, "Sarah, you're just being paranoid. He loves you. You're just stressed." She had gaslighted me while holding my hand. She had groomed me to accept my own betrayal. And now she was sitting in my chair, wearing the consequences of the prize she had won. "I'm not lying," she sobbed, her defense crumbling instantly. "I'm scared, Sarah. I'm terrified. He's changed. He's not the man we knew. He drinks. He screams. He talks about you." The room went deadly silent. The kettle began to whistle, a low, rising shriek that mirrored the panic rising in my throat, but I didn't move to turn it off. "He talks about me?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "He blames me," Julia said, looking up at me with eyes that were wide pools of horror. "He says I ruined his life. He says he never should have left. He says you were the only good thing he ever had, and I'm the witch who took him away from his blessing." She choked on the words, vomiting them out like poison she couldn't hold in anymore. "He calls my name, but he looks at me with hate, pure hate. And tonight he told me that if I didn't get out of his sight, he was going to finish what he started." I turned off the stove, silencing the screaming kettle. My world was tilting on its axis. For 10 years, I had imagined them in a bliss of exotic vacations and expensive dinners, laughing at the naive woman they left behind. I had tortured myself with visions of their happiness. I had built an entire narrative where I was the loser and they were the winners. And all this time, God had been dismantling them. All this time, the fruit of their betrayal had been rotting from the inside out. I looked at Julia, really looked at her, and I didn't see a rival anymore. I saw a prisoner. "Why come to me?" I asked, my voice steady now, grounded in a sudden, terrifying realization. "You have parents. You have sisters. You have 100 friends who took your side when the divorce happened. Why come to the woman you destroyed?" Julia stopped crying. She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. When she looked up, her expression was stark, stripped of all pretense. "Because you're the only one who prays," she whispered. "I didn't need a place to hide, Sarah. I needed a place where God still lives, because he left my house a long time ago." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The only one who prays. The sheer weight of that statement crushed the air out of my lungs. She hadn't come for my friendship. She hadn't come for my money. She had come because she sensed, even in her spiritual blindness, that I had something she had lost. She was seeking sanctuary not in my home, but in my spirit. And I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of shame. Because while my house might have been a place of prayer, my heart, in that very moment, had been a house of judgment. I poured the water into the mugs, watching the steam rise, realizing that the test wasn't about letting her in the door. That was the easy part. The test was about to be whether I could let go of the satisfaction of seeing her suffer long enough to actually help her. As I handed her the mug, her fingers brushed mine, cold against warm, and a jolt of electricity passed between us. Not the static of hatred, but the current of a connection that was about to drag me into the darkest trench of my past to fight a battle I thought I had already won. "Drink," I said softly, "then tell me everything." The steam from the tea curled between us like a white flag of truce that neither of us was fully ready to wave. Julia held the mug with both hands, her knuckles white, as if the ceramic warmth was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. I sat opposite her, the wooden table acting as both a bridge and a barricade. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to demand an itemized list of every moment of happiness she had stolen from me and then burn it in front of her eyes. But I stayed silent. I let the silence stretch until it became a physical weight, forcing her to carry the burden of breaking it. The rain lashed against the kitchen window, a relentless rhythmic pounding that mimicked the headache beginning to throb behind my temples. "It started with the little things," Julia began, her voice trembling, eyes fixed on the dark liquid in her cup. "At first, it was just silence. We moved into that big house on the hill, the one you and he had looked at in the magazines. He bought it for me 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I thought I had won, Sarah. God help me. I really thought I had won the lottery. I had the man, the money, the status. I walked around that town with my head held high because I thought love justified the carnage. She let out a bitter, jagged laugh that sounded like glass breaking. But the house, it never felt like home. It felt like a stage set. David would come home from work and he wouldn't look at me. He would pour a drink, sit in his study, and stare at the wall. When I asked him what was wrong, he would say he was tired. But it wasn't tiredness. It was regret. I felt a twist in my gut, a sharp pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but was dangerously close to it. I had spent years imagining them laughing in that house. I had tortured myself with mental movies of their domestic bliss. To hear that the walls I envied had been a prison of silence was a revelation that disoriented me. Regret? I asked, the word slipping out before I could stop it. He missed you, Julia said. She looked up then, and the raw honesty in her eyes was devastating. He never said it, not at first, but I felt it in everything he did. I tried to cook his favorite pot roast, the one you used to make on Sundays. I burned it. He threw the plate across the room. That was the first time I saw the rage. He screamed that the meat was dry, but we both knew that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I wasn't you. I tried to decorate the living room the way you had your old apartment. I bought the same curtains. I started wearing my hair in a bun because you used to wear yours like that. I was trying to become you, Sarah. I was trying to shapeshift into the woman he actually loved because I realized too late that I was just the distraction he used to blow up his life. The air in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. I sat back, stunned. The woman who had betrayed me, who had stolen my life, had spent the last decade trying to be me. It was a twisted, psychological horror story that I had never even conceived of. The vindication I thought I would feel didn't come. Instead, I felt a profound, sickening sadness. What a waste. What a catastrophic waste of 3 lives. We had all been destroyed. Me by betrayal, them by the hollow victory of their sin. He started drinking more, she continued, tears now flowing freely again, dripping off her chin into her tea. And the drinking unlocked the monster. He would get drunk and list my faults. He would tell me I was shallow, that I was selfish, that I was a snake. And the worst part? He would quote the Bible verses you used to read to him. He would twist them and use them to condemn me. He became obsessed with the idea of judgment. He said we were cursed, that everything he touched turned to ash because he had violated a covenant. And I just took it. I took it because I thought I deserved it. I thought this was my penance for what I did to you. You should have left, I said, my voice hard. You should have left the first time he threw a plate. I couldn't, she whispered. I had alienated everyone. My parents were ashamed of the affair, my friends. They were your friends first, Sarah. They chose you. The ones who stayed with me were just fair-weather acquaintances who wanted to be near the money. I was alone on an island with a man who hated himself for choosing me. And then, the business started to tank. The money dried up. The stress got worse. And the violence. It moved from plates to walls, and then from walls to me. She touched her bruised jaw again, a subconscious gesture of protection. Tonight was different. He came home early. He didn't smell like whiskey. He smelled like something chemical. His eyes were blown wide. He was holding a gun, Sarah. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Gun. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a sob story anymore. This was a life or death situation sitting at my kitchen table. He put it on the table, Julia sobbed, her composure shattering completely. He spun it around. He said there was only one way to clean the slate. He said blood calls for blood. He said he was coming to find you, Sarah. He said he needed to apologize to you, and that the only way you would forgive him is if he brought him a sacrifice. I stood up so fast my chair screeched against the floor tiles, a horrible, piercing sound. He said what? He thinks in his twisted mind that if he gets rid of me, if he eliminates the sin, that you'll take him back, she gasped, hyperventilating now. He's insane, Sarah. He's had a psychotic break. I managed to run when he went to the bathroom. I grabbed my keys and I just drove. But I know him. I know how his mind works when he's like this. He's not just looking for me. He's coming here. He's coming to the source. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I wasn't just harboring a fugitive, I was the target. The safe haven I had built, the sanctuary of prayer and peace, was suddenly ground zero. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave, 11:42 p.m. The darkness outside the window felt heavy, concealing a threat that was no longer theoretical. I reached for my phone on the counter, my fingers fumbling to unlock the screen. "I'm calling the police," I stated, my voice shaking but resolute. "We need protection, now." "No!" Julia lunged across the table and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by adrenaline. "You can't. He has scanner apps. He listens to the police frequencies. He's paranoid. If he hears a dispatch to this address, he won't come to talk. He'll come shooting. He'll burn the house down with us inside. You don't know what he's become." "So what do you expect me to do, Julia?" I hissed, pulling my arm away from her touch. "Wait for him to kick down my door? I am not a warrior. I am a 60-year-old woman living alone. You brought a storm to my door, and now you tell me I can't use an umbrella? We need to leave," she pleaded. "We need to get in your car and go somewhere he won't think of. A hotel in the next county. Anywhere." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the terrified child beneath the aging, bruised woman. And then, a sound cut through the noise of the rain. It was faint at first, then unmistakable. The crunch of gravel. My driveway was long, winding through the oak trees, covered in loose stone. Someone was driving up the path, slowly, with the lights off. The creeping sound of tires on rocks was louder than any siren. My heart stopped. I looked at the window. 2 beams of light suddenly cut through the darkness, illuminating the rain like falling needles, sweeping across the front yard before cutting out abruptly. The engine died. Silence returned, but it was a menacing silence, heavy with intent. "He's here," Julia whispered, her face draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. "Oh God, Sarah, he found me." I was paralyzed. 10 years of peace, 10 years of healing, 10 years of distance, all erased by the sound of a car door slamming shut in my driveway. The man who had broken my heart was now standing on my property, armed and unhinged. Fear, primal and icy, gripped my throat. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A strange, hot anger. This was my home. This was my sanctuary. He had taken my past. He would not take my present. I looked at the back door, then at the phone in my hand, then at Julia, cowering in her chair. "Get under the table," I whispered, my voice transforming into something steel-hard. "What?" "Get under the table, Julia. Now," I commanded. She scrambled down, curling into a ball on the floor, hidden by the tablecloth. I stood alone in the kitchen, the bright light making me a perfect target. I reached over and flipped the switch, plunging the room into darkness. Now we were both in the shadows. I moved to the hallway, my eyes adjusting to the gloom, and I watched the front door. The heavy oak door I had opened earlier to let mercy in was now the only thing standing between us and judgment. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. It rattled as he realized it was locked. Then, a heavy fist pounded on the wood. Boom, boom, boom. The house shook. "Sarah," a voice called out. It was a voice I hadn't heard in a decade, but it was instantly familiar. It was deeper, rougher, slurred with madness and liquor. But it was him. "Sarah, open the door. I brought you a present. I fixed it, Sarah. I fixed everything." I stood in the hallway, my breath held, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't just facing my ex-husband. I was facing the personification of my own bitterness, returning to claim its due. I closed my eyes and did the only thing I could do. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for God. "Lord," I prayed silently, the words screaming in my mind. "You told me to forgive. You didn't tell me how to survive this. Show me. Now." The pounding stopped. I heard heavy footsteps moving off the porch, crunching through the mulch of my flower beds. He wasn't leaving. He was going around to the back, to the glass sliding door in the kitchen. The door that had a faulty lock. The door where Julia was hiding. I opened my eyes, and in the darkness, I ran. I ran through the darkness of my own home, not with the grace of a heroine, but with the clumsy, desperate terror of a woman who knows she is seconds away from losing everything. My socks slid on the smooth hallway floor, and I nearly collided with the wall as I took the corner into the kitchen. The silence of the house was gone, replaced by the aggressive rattle of the sliding glass door handle being jerked back and forth. The lock, that stubborn, sticky mechanism I had been meaning to replace for 3 years, was the only thing holding back the nightmare. I saw his silhouette through the glass, a hulking shadow against the gray backdrop of the storm. He was using his shoulder now, ramming it against the frame with a dull, sickening thud that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bare feet. "Julia, stay down," I hissed into the gloom, my voice barely audible over the rain. "Don't breathe, don't move." I didn't wait for an answer. I lunged for the counter, grabbing the first heavy object my hand touched, a cast-iron skillet sitting on the drying rack. It was a pathetic defense against a gun, a laughable attempt at protection, but the weight of the iron in my hand gave me a shred of grounding. Before I could reach the door to reinforce the lock, the metal gave way. There was a sharp crack, like a dry branch snapping, and the door slid open with a violent screech of metal on metal. The wind roared into the kitchen, blowing rain across the tiles, and with it came David. He stepped inside, breathing heavily, the sound wet and ragged. He didn't look like the man who had worn Italian suits and charmed the church deacons. He looked feral. His hair was plastered to his skull, his shirt was torn at the collar, and his eyes were wild, darting around the room with a manic energy that made my blood run cold. In his right hand, hanging loosely by his side, was the gun. It was black, ugly, and terrifyingly real. He didn't raise it immediately. Instead, he looked at me. He squinted through the darkness, and then a slow, distorted smile spread across his face. "Sarah," he breathed, the name sounding like a prayer from the lips of a damned man. "You waited up." My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs, I thought he must be able to hear it. I stood between him and the table where Julia was hiding, gripping the skillet behind my back, trying to make myself look bigger, trying to hide the trembling that was shaking my entire frame. "I'm here, David," I said, forcing my voice to be steady, low, and calm. It was the voice I used to use when he was stressed about work, the soothing tone of the dutiful wife. "I'm right here. Why don't you put the gun down? You're scaring me." He looked at the gun as if he had forgotten he was holding it. He frowned, a look of genuine confusion crossing his features. "This? No, Sarah. This isn't for you. I would never hurt you. You're the saint. You're the one who stayed pure." He took a step forward, his boots squelching on the wet floor. The smell coming off him was overpowering, stale whiskey, sweat, and the metallic tang of ozone. "I brought this to clean the house, to get rid of the vermin." "Did she come here, Sarah? Did the snake slither back to the garden?" Every instinct screamed at me to lie, to say I hadn't seen her, that she was miles away. But David knew me. He knew I was a terrible liar. And he knew her car was likely parked down the road or hidden nearby. If I lied and he found her, he would shoot us both without hesitation. I had to pivot. I had to use the truth to manipulate him. "She came," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "She came here because she was afraid of you, David. She said you were going to kill her." "She's right," he shouted, the sudden volume making me flinch. He waved the gun in the air, a gesture of frustration. "I have to. Don't you see? It's the only way to balance the scales. God told me, Sarah." He told me in a dream. "Cut off the hand that causes you to sin. She is the hand. She is the eye. If I get rid of her, we can go back. We can go back to the way it was before the darkness." He took another step, invading my personal space, his face looming out of the shadows. "I miss the light, Sarah. I miss the way you looked at me before I broke everything. I can fix it. I just need to make the sacrifice." The theological perversion of his words made me sick. He was twisting scripture to justify murder, wrapping his psychosis in the language of redemption. It was the ultimate betrayal of faith, but I saw the desperation in him. He wasn't just a killer. He was a man drowning in a decade of guilt, looking for a violent life raft. "David," I said, stepping forward, closing the distance between us so he would focus on me and not scan the room. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, a cloying, sweet rot. You can't buy forgiveness with blood. That's not how it works. You know that. You went to Sunday school. You know that grace is a gift, not a transaction. He stopped, blinking rapidly, tears suddenly welling in his eyes. The mood swing was instantaneous and terrifying. But I ruined it, he whispered, his voice breaking. I had a queen, and I chased a whore. I'm so tired, Sarah. I'm so tired of pretending I'm happy. I just want to come home. He reached out with his free hand, his fingers trembling, reaching for my face. I stood frozen, letting him touch my cheek. His hand was cold and wet, rough against my skin. It took every ounce of willpower not to recoil. This was the hand that had held mine at our wedding. This was the hand that had signed the divorce papers. This was the hand that had struck the woman hiding under my table. I looked into his eyes, seeing the ruin of the man I once loved, and I felt a surge of pity so profound it almost knocked me over. He was a shell, a broken, dangerous shell. You are home, I lied, my voice soft. You're here, we can talk, but not with that gun, David. Please, give me the gun. I slowly brought my hand out from behind my back, releasing the skillet onto the counter with a soft clatter. I reached for the weapon. He looked at my hand, then at the gun, indecision warring behind his eyes. For a second, I thought I had him. I thought the connection of our past was strong enough to break through the madness. His grip loosened, the barrel lowered, and then Julia sneezed. It was a tiny sound, a suppressed, stifled explosion of breath that she had tried desperately to hold in. But in the quiet tension of the kitchen, it sounded like a bomb. David's head snapped up. The softness vanished from his face instantly, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He shoved me backward, hard. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the sink, gasping for air. "You liar!" he roared, raising the gun again. "You hit her! You're protecting her, after everything she did to us?" He spun toward the table, the gun leveling at the tablecloth that was draped over the side. "Come out!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Come out, Jezebel! I know you're there!" "David, no!" I screamed, launching myself away from the counter. He didn't wait. He kicked the chair aside, sending it skittering across the floor. He reached down, grabbed the tablecloth, and ripped it away in one violent motion. Julia was curled in a ball on the floor, her hands over her head, shaking so hard she was vibrating. She looked up at him, her face a mask of terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. "David, please," she begged, her voice a high, thin wail. "Please don't." "It's too late for please," he spat, aiming the gun directly at her chest. "It's time to pay the bill." I didn't think. I didn't calculate the odds. I didn't pray for guidance. I just moved. I threw myself between them. I stepped directly in front of the barrel of the gun, shielding the woman who had destroyed my marriage with my own body. The metal of the gun barrel pressed against my sternum, cold and hard through my sweater. David froze. His finger was on the trigger, the knuckle white with tension. He stared at me, his mouth open in shock. "Move," he growled. "Sarah, move. She deserves this. You know she deserves this." I looked him dead in the eye, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the steel of the weapon. "Maybe she does," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Maybe we all do. But you're going to have to shoot through me to get to her." The silence that followed was absolute. The rain outside seemed to stop. The wind held its breath. It was just me, him, and the gun. I could see the madness in his eyes battling with the memory of who I was to him. I was gambling my life on the hope that the man who once loved me was still somewhere inside this monster. "Why?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Why would you save her? She stole me from you." "Because," I said, tears finally spilling over my lashes, hot and fast. "Because if I let you kill her, David, she steals you from God forever. And I won't let her take that too." His hand trembled. The gun wavered. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to drop it. I thought I had reached him. Then, his eyes hardened. A dark, resolved curtain fell over his gaze. He stepped back, keeping the gun trained on my chest. "You always were too good for your own good, Sarah," he muttered. But I can't go back. I've come too far. He shifted his aim. Not at me, not at Julia. He raised the gun toward the ceiling, a look of utter defeat crossing his face. And my blood turned to ice as I realized what he was about to do. But before I could scream, before he could pull the trigger, the kitchen exploded with light. Blue and red strobe lights flashed through the open sliding door, blinding us. A megaphone voice boomed from the darkness outside, shattering the standoff. "Police! Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" David flinched, his head snapping toward the yard. The distraction was microscopic, a fraction of a second, but it was all I needed. I lunged for the gun. The sound of a gunshot in a confined space is not like it is in the movies. It doesn't just ring, it punches. It is a physical, concussive force that sucks the air out of the room and replaces it with a high-pitched, screaming silence. When I lunged for the gun, my hand wrapped around the barrel just as David's finger twitched. We wrestled for a fraction of a second, a chaotic, clumsy dance of desperation before the weapon discharged. The explosion was blinding. I felt the heat of the muzzle flash sear against my forearm, a sudden, sharp bite of fire. The recoil tore the gun from both of our grips, sending it spinning across the linoleum floor, clattering into the baseboards like a discarded toy. For a heartbeat, we both froze. The smell of gunpowder, acrid and sulfurous, filled the kitchen instantly, choking out the smell of the rain and the whiskey. I looked down at myself, frantic, checking for blood, checking for a hole in my chest. I looked at David. He was standing there, blinking, looking at his empty hands with an expression of childlike bewilderment. The bullet had gone into the ceiling, punching a neat dark hole in the plaster, raining white dust down onto the table where Julia was still screaming, her hands clamped over her ears. Then, the world came crashing in. The sliding glass door was filled with dark uniforms. "Police! Get down! Get on the ground!" The voices were layered, shouting over one another, a wall of authoritative noise. Before David could even process the command, he was tackled. 2 officers hit him with the force of a freight train, driving him into the cabinets. I heard the sickening crunch of his shoulder hitting the wood, followed by the metallic rasp of handcuffs being ratcheted tight. I stood pressed against the sink, my chest heaving, my ears ringing so loudly I could barely hear my own sobbing. I watched as the man I had once promised to love, honor, and cherish was hauled to his feet. He wasn't fighting them. All the fight had drained out of him the moment the gun went off. He hung limp in their grip, a puppet with cut strings. As they dragged him toward the broken door, he turned his head. His eyes found mine. In the chaos of the flashing red and blue lights that were now strobing through my kitchen, painting everything in a nightmarish disco of emergency, I saw him. I didn't see the monster. I didn't see the abuser. I saw the ruin of a man who had let one mistake metastasize until it consumed his soul. He moved his lips, mouthing something I couldn't hear over the chaos. But I knew what he said. "I'm sorry." It was a useless, tragic apology, 10 years too late and $1 million short. Then, they pushed his head down and guided him out into the storm. The door to the patrol car slammed shut, a final, definitive punctuation mark on the marriage that had died a decade ago. The next hour was a blur of procedural intrusion. My sanctuary was violated in a different way. Strangers in boots tracked mud across my floors. A paramedic checked my arm where the muzzle flash had burned me. A superficial wound. A red welt that would blister. A physical brand of the night's trauma. An officer took my statement, his pen scratching across a notepad, asking clinical questions about a situation that was entirely emotional. Did he threaten you? Did you see the weapon? What is your relationship to the suspect? I answered them robotically, my voice detached, as if I were describing a scene from a book I had read. I was in shock. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving me shaking, cold, and nauseous. And then there was Julia. She hadn't moved from under the table until the police coaxed her out. Now, she sat on the same chair she had occupied earlier, wrapped in a shock blanket the paramedics had given her. She was staring at the hole in the ceiling, her face a mask of soot and tears. The officers asked if she wanted to press charges. She just nodded, a slow, mechanical movement. They asked if she had somewhere to go. She didn't answer. She just looked at me. The silence between us was heavy, loaded with the unsaid. The police, sensing the complexity of the domestic disaster they had walked into, looked between us with confusion. "Ma'am," the officer said to me, "does she need a ride to a shelter or a relative's house?" I looked at the woman who had destroyed my life. I looked at the bruise on her face, the terror in her eyes, the absolute solitude of her existence. If I sent her away now, into the system, into the cold night, she would break. And despite everything, despite the venom that had coursed through my veins for 10 years, I couldn't do it. I had stood in front of a gun for her. Sending her to a shelter felt like undoing that sacrifice. "No," I said, my voice raspy. "She stays here." The officer raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. They finished their work, collected the gun, bagging it as evidence, and slowly, one by one, they left. The last patrol car pulled away, the red and blue lights fading from my walls, leaving us back in the dim, warm light of the kitchen. The silence that returned was louder than the sirens. It was 3 a.m. The rain had stopped. The storm had passed, leaving behind a broken door, a hole in the ceiling, and 2 broken women sitting in a kitchen that smelled of burnt gunpowder. I got up and walked to the broken sliding door. The lock was sheared off, the frame bent. I shoved a chair under the handle, a futile gesture of security, but it made me feel better. Then I turned to the kettle. I turned the stove back on. It was an absurd reaction. The world had just ended, and I was making tea, but I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I needed the routine. I needed the normalcy. "Why?" The word was a whisper, barely audible. Julia was looking at me, the shock blanket slipping off her shoulders. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a confusion so deep it looked like pain. "Why did you do that, Sarah? You stood in front of the gun. You could have died." I watched the blue flame of the gas burner, mesmerizing and steady. "I know," I said softly. "But why?" she insisted, her voice rising, cracking with hysteria. "I took him from you. I lied to you. I laughed at you. I am the reason you spent 10 years alone. You should have let him shoot me. You should have let him finish it. It would have been justice." She slammed her hand on the table, the sound startling in the quiet room. She was angry. She was angry that I had robbed her of her punishment. She was drowning in guilt, and my mercy was suffocating her. I turned off the stove. I didn't pour the water. I turned around and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "Justice?" I asked quietly. "You think that would have been justice? If he had killed you, Julia, he would have been a murderer. He would have lost his soul completely, and I would have been the woman who watched it happen." "I don't deserve your help," she sobbed, putting her head in her hands. "I don't deserve to be in your house. I don't deserve to be alive." "No, you don't," I said. It was harsh, but it was the truth. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. "And neither do I." She looked up, startled. "What? You think I'm a saint, Julia?" I walked over to the table and sat down across from her. "You think I spent the last 10 years praying for your happiness? I hated you. I hated you with a darkness that scared me. There were nights I prayed for your marriage to fail. There were nights I prayed for you to feel the pain I felt. I wanted you to suffer." I reached out and touched the rough fabric of the shock blanket. I built a shrine to my own victimhood. I worshiped my pain. And that hatred? It was killing me just as surely as David's gun would have killed you. It was a slow poison. "But you saved me," she whispered. "I didn't save you for you," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I saved you because I refused to let the darkness win. If I had let him kill you, or if I had turned you away tonight, the hate would have won. It would have been the final period at the end of our story. And I am so tired, Julia. I am so tired of the hate. I realized tonight, when he pointed that gun at you, that I didn't want you dead. I just wanted the pain to stop, and letting you die wouldn't have stopped the pain. It would have made it eternal." Julia stared at me, her mouth slightly open, processing a theology of grace that didn't make sense to the human ego. "So what now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's gone. The police took him. It's over." "No." I shook my head, feeling the tears finally, truly begin to fall. "It's not over. The easy part is over. The adrenaline is over. Now comes the hard part. Now we have to wake up tomorrow. Now we have to deal with the mess. Now we have to actually figure out how to forgive. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free. I reached across the table. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. My hand trembled. Every memory of her betrayal screamed at me to pull back. But I pushed through the resistance, through the scar tissue of my heart, and I took her hand. It was cold. It was limp. But as I squeezed it, she squeezed back. And in that kitchen, under the hole in the ceiling, with the ghost of my marriage finally exorcised in the back of a police car, the real work of healing began. "Go upstairs," I said softly. "Take the guest room. We'll talk in the morning." The light of the new morning was pale, hesitant, filtering through the broken sliding door and illuminating the wreckage of my kitchen. It was an inventory of chaos. The soot-stained ceiling where the bullet had exited, the dark streaks of mud and rainwater across the white tiles, the smell of gunpowder still clinging stubbornly to the curtains. But the most profound difference was the quiet. It was the absence of terror, a deep, heavy silence that felt like the earth holding its breath after an earthquake. I hadn't slept, of course. I had spent the night alternating between standing guard by the broken door and scrubbing the kitchen floor with a frantic energy that was half adrenaline and half prayer. When Julia finally came downstairs, hours later, she looked like a shadow. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide, staring at the sight of me kneeling on the floor, scrubbing away the mud that David's boots had tracked in. She hadn't been crying, but her face was swollen with exhaustion and shock. She was wearing one of my spare bathrobes, the cotton making her look small and fragile. I gestured toward the kitchen table, which I had cleaned and set with 2 simple mugs of coffee and 2 pieces of toast. "It's not much," I said, my voice hoarse. "But we need coffee." We sat in silence, drinking the hot black coffee. It was the quietest, most excruciating breakfast of my life. The unspoken history between us, the jealousy, the lies, the pain, and now the impossible act of mercy filled the air like a gas. Julia finally broke the silence, her voice almost a whisper. "I called a lawyer's office, and I called my sister. I told her what happened. She's coming to pick me up this afternoon." "Good," I said simply. I didn't press her for details. She needed to focus on the next step, not the emotional abyss behind her. But then she looked at me, really looked at me, and her eyes filled with a grief that had nothing to do with her ex-husband. "I owe you everything, Sarah," she choked out. "I don't know how I can ever repay you. You saved my life, and you saved David's soul too. You kept him from committing murder." "You don't owe me anything," I replied, the words surprisingly easy to say. I had to make her understand this wasn't a transaction. If you try to repay this, it stops being grace. It becomes a debt, and I refuse to carry a debt over your head for the rest of our lives. This was a choice I made for my own freedom, Julia. That's the truth. I refuse to let your sin continue to poison my spirit. It was in the long hours of the morning, sitting there in the wreckage, that I understood the true, terrifying meaning of forgiveness. For 10 years, I thought forgiveness was a feeling, a gentle, warm blanket of peace that would settle over me once I had processed the hurt. I thought it meant forgetting the pain, or maybe even reconciling the friendship. I was wrong. Forgiveness, I realized, is none of those things. Forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is a violent, deliberate act of the will, a spiritual discipline that must be renewed every single day. It is the conscious, repeated choice to release the perpetrator from the debt they owe you. That debt is real. Julia destroyed 10 years of my life, eroded my trust, and brought a gun to my kitchen. She deserved to pay. Every human instinct, every legal and emotional precedent screamed that she should be held accountable. And yet, the spiritual mandate was clear: release the prisoner. And the terrifying truth is that when you refuse to forgive, the prisoner you think you are holding captive is yourself. By choosing to protect Julia, by choosing to step in front of that gun, I didn't erase the past. I didn't pretend the betrayal hadn't happened. I simply declared, in the most physical and absolute way possible, that I would no longer allow the memory of her sin to define my future. The healing wasn't the absence of the memory. The healing was the absence of the reaction to the memory. I still remembered the pain, but the memory no longer had the power to paralyze me or to make me wish death on another human being. That night, I didn't forgive Julia. I forgave David. And most importantly, I finally, truly forgave myself for not being enough to keep him. We talked for 2 more hours. We didn't talk about getting back to friendship. That would take years, perhaps a lifetime, and it might never happen. We talked about safety. We talked about God. Julia finally, truly apologized, not with the half-hearted regret of a scared woman, but with the full, broken repentance of a woman who had hit rock bottom and finally found a moment of grace. She apologized for the lying, for the theft, for the years of arrogance. And as she spoke, something shifted in my heart. The granite wall I had built around my pain didn't crumble. It simply opened a door. When her sister's car pulled up the driveway, slowly, cautiously, noting the police tape still fluttering from the broken door, it was time to say goodbye. Julia stood at the front door looking back at me, her eyes glistening. "I don't know what happens now," she whispered. "We both start over," I told her, my voice strong. "You start by seeking counseling, by getting safe, by rebuilding your life with integrity. I start by calling the repairman to fix this door and that ceiling." I looked at the dark hole above the kitchen. "I'm going to leave that hole open for a while, Julia. Not as a reminder of the night, but as a reminder that even when things are violently broken, grace can fill the void." I watched her walk away, watched the car pull out of my driveway and disappear down the street. And then I was alone, truly alone. But it was a different kind of solitude. It wasn't the lonely isolation of a victim. It was the sacred quiet of a victor. I closed the door, noticing the deep scratch marks David's gun had left on the oak wood. Those marks, like the scar on my forearm and the hole in the ceiling, would stay. But they were no longer monuments to my suffering. They were testimonies to the power of a choice. I walked back into my quiet living room and sank into my favorite armchair. I closed my eyes and I prayed. I prayed for Julia, that she would find true healing and peace. And then, in the hardest prayer of all, I prayed for David. I prayed that he would find repentance in the silence of his prison cell, that he would encounter the same radical, undeserved grace that I had offered to Julia. Because if I wanted to be free, I had to release them both. I had to let God be the judge and take off the executioner's cloak I had worn for so long. If you are listening to this and you are holding on to a decade of pain, if you are letting the venom of unforgiveness poison your present, I want you to look at the hole in my ceiling. Look at the damage. The pain is real, the betrayal was real, but the power you give it is a choice. Forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about setting yourself free from the cage you built for them. It cost me everything to let the woman who betrayed me back into my life, but in that act, I didn't just save her. I saved the woman I was meant to be. I chose peace over pride. I chose grace over judgment. And now, I am finally, truly home.